Can you please just talk like a normal person?
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Severance Season 2, Episode 7, Chicky Bardo. This may be one of the best episodes of the series to date. We finally got a peek behind the curtain on what really happened to Gemma, how she was kidnapped by Lumen, and how she became Miss Casey. This episode has finally revealed what's happening on that testing floor, the level beneath the severed floor, and what the members of Macro Data Refinement's mysterious and important work really is. And we got confirmation on a long-held theory of mine and many others that Lumen essentially abducted Miss Casey in exchange for a promise of giving her and Mark a child. Now, a little later, I'm going to be joined by the ScreenCrush video analysis team to discuss this episode, but first, let's break down exactly what's going on in this episode and explain all of the hidden clues and details of Lumen's mission with Mark and Gemma. And then we'll of course discuss what's really going on in all of these different rooms on the testing floor. Oh, and hey, by the way, be sure to check out our Praise Gear shirt up on the merch store right now, ScreenCrushMerch.com. Okay, so before we get rolling on the breakdown, let's explain the meaning of the title Chicky Bardo. Now, this is what is known as a transitional state of consciousness. Sound familiar? But it particularly refers to a transitional state of consciousness when someone is in the process of dying. I actually found a great post on Reddit from Alex1 Inferno detailing the meaning of this phrase in regards to severance. So Chicky Bardo is a Buddhist term for the fourth of 6 bardos, which are stages that a soul experiences, 3 in life and 3 in death. This bardo is the first of death, experienced immediately after physically dying, when the consciousness separates from the body. That of course ties into how we are seeing Gemma's experience after she supposedly died. Now, Alex goes on to explain that this is when one either sees the clear light of reality and merges with this light to achieve enlightenment, liberation, and escape from the cycle of rebirth, or due to fear or attachment, fails to recognize it and continues to go through other further states of dying. This is a stage in which rituals and prayers to the dying or dead help guide them toward the light. Now, following the Chicky Bardo is the Chonyad Bardo. Please do forgive me if I am mispronouncing that. This is when one encounters visions and karmic projections of one's past actions, thoughts, and desires that test your mental fortitude and your ability to dispel illusion, which is exactly what we're seeing happening on the testing floor. Alex explains that you are judged by a Lord of Death and a hallucinate hell, monsters, and violence. One's deeds are weighed, but every stage is really all an internal struggle and test of yourself. Now, the Sidpa Bardo, which I'm also probably mispronouncing, my apologies, is the last possible end to this cycle. If they continue to be unable to recognize the illusion, they will seek reincarnation in a new vessel, being pushed and pulled to what their next existence should be, continuing the karmic cycle to the first Bardo of birth and life. This, of course, all ties into the idea of eternal life that we have theorized many times here on the channel that Lumen is trying to achieve with the resurrection of Kier. But there's also a sense of like reversed reincarnation being that your soul goes into a new body, which could be what they're trying to do with Kier's consciousness, put him in a new body. But also we're seeing a reverse of this with the severed individuals because they are having new consciousnesses put into the same body. So it's like the body is continuing on, but it's a new consciousness. It's like a reverse reincarnation. And we are seeing Gemma and even Mark and the other macro data refiners, they are being put through these tests, these emotional tests, and seeing certain things. It all ties into this Bardo stuff. So there's a lot to dissect here. One being that this perfectly explains what we're seeing in this episode with both Mark and Gemma experiencing this phenomenon. Mark, following the flooding of his chip and his nasty fall in the previous episode, is knocking on death's door, and we are seeing him essentially relive parts of his life with Gemma and giving us, as the audience, their backstory. The same is true with Gemma, who who supposedly died in a car accident, but it's clear now that she was just abducted by Lumen, or perhaps she was even persuaded to fake her death by Lumen and go with them to do these tests in exchange for them helping her become pregnant. Now, this discussion of consciousness and existing beyond the physical body and talks of reincarnation, it all ties perfectly into our theory of what Lumen is trying to accomplish: eternal life. We've discussed how we believe Lumen is attempting to achieve immortality by understanding consciousness and being able to give tangibility to consciousness to where they can actually grasp it and perhaps transfer it.
I can almost see it.
Now, this also of course ties into hell and limbo, another connection to Lumen and its many levels beneath, representing the 9 circles of hell, and how characters like Mark, Gemma, and the macrodata refining team and other innies are essentially in this state of eternal purgatory. Mark and Gemma in this episode are both in a state of limbo, jumping back and forth in time, and various consciousnesses are present, and we are on this Chicky Bardo journey with them. Now, one thing I love about this show is the constant wondering of what's true and what's really happening in the layers and layers of Lumen deception, as well as the welcome deceptions that the show's writers use to keep us on our toes. But the place where I don't want lies, deceptions, or misdirects is where I consume my news. And that's why I use Ground News. They're the sponsor of this video. Ground News is an app and website that gathers related articles from across the world into one place, but they give you the context about the source's political leanings, their reliability, and their ownership. This means that you can see through the bias and think critically about the news that you are consuming. For example, here's a story about NBC nightly news anchor Lester Holt stepping down after a decade of work on the program. Left-wing sites like the Washington Informer pointed out that this step down is happening in the midst of MSNBC facing some backlash over cutting black voices from their network, while a site on the right, like the Gateway Pundit, referred to Lester as a Trump hater in their headline. Now, if you look here, we can also see that this story as a whole has 28 left-leaning articles, 21 right-leaning articles, and 45 in the center. And best of all, I can see the media ownership of each article. See, I want to know that the news isn't trying to sway me one way or the other. So Ground News even has this blind spot section that shows you news stories that each side is ignoring. For instance, here's a story about Representative Richie Torres endorsing Andrew Cuomo for New York City mayor. Only 10% of the articles for this story were left-leaning, while 60% were right-leaning. Or there's this one where Greenpeace is saying that a pipeline company's lawsuit threatens the organization's future. 64% of the sites that covered this story were on the left, while only 4% were on the right. Now, Ground News is an incredible resource, and I've been looking for a service like Ground News for years. I highly encourage you to check them out. So if you go to ground.news/SC or click this QR code, you will get 40% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to every feature. This is their best deal of the year, and it is only available for a limited time. Your subscription will not only help this channel, but you will also be supporting an independent platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. Now, back to Severance. Here we can see Gemma's hair down, just like in this blink and you'll miss it frame from the previous episode. We even learned later in the episode that her hair is still long and that Miss Casey actually is wearing a wig. So we know that Mark was a history professor and Gemma was a Russian lit professor. And we're getting to see them meet for the first time here at a blood drive that is being conducted by Lumen, eerily confirming that Lumen has been involved in Mark and Gemma's relationship from the very start. And we can safely assume that the blood donation setup is just a front for Lumen to find the perfect candidates to use as testing subjects for the Severance procedure. So Mark is reading a paper titled All Quiet on the Western Blunt, of course a reference to All Quiet on the Western Front, a novel first published back in 1928, actually within a German newspaper first, and then in book form the following year. This book was one of many that was banned by Nazi Germany and supposed to be burned. Now, this book takes place during the First World World War, which, remember, Mark is a professor of.
Well, I'm not sure. I taught mostly about World War I.
Now, we've talked before about how there's totally something Nazi-ish going on with Lumen. They have their white savior, they're practicing pretty much this eugenic style of doing things, they're perfecting the world and recreating it in the image of their leader, Keir. And there's also those illustrations depicting blackface. Cold Harbor has a connection to a eugenics lab, and I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Keir himself may have been a Nazi. Or at least that this story is adopting themes of Nazism. And I mean, look at this guy. Total Nazi.
You just kind of give that vibe.
No offense to the actor, he did great. So we hear Gemma ask,
Where did you go?
which is echoed at the end of the episode when Mark is asked the same question by Devin.
Where'd you go?
Both were in states of mental flashback thinking about the other. So here on the testing floor, which remember, this is where Miss Casey was sent back in season 1, and she is now conscious as Gemma down on that testing floor. Here we can see a standard eye chart in this exam room, but we also see this chart that features baby goats at various angles, but the goat imagery doesn't actually line up with the letters. For example, the letter E you'd think would correlate with an upright goat. That's how it is at the top of the board. But when you look on row 5 at the letter E, its goat counterpart is in a different position. So anyway, as Gemma is walking down the halls of the testing floor, which I'd like to point out has more of a hospital aesthetic instead of the office aesthetic that we see on the severed floor. Anyway, as she's walking down the hall, we see various rooms labeled with names we actually saw on Mark's digital Rolodex. Each of these rooms seems to be another severed personality, meaning that Gemma has far more personalities than just her own and Miss Casey. And these poor personalities only exist within these rooms.
But it's been 6 weeks.
I was just here.
So it would appear that we're getting a callback to season 1 where we learn that the severance procedure was being used by wealthy elites to not have to undergo experiences like the pains of childbirth. And the same appears to be true here for things like going to the dentist, flying on a plane, or writing thank you letters. I should also mention really quick that we did see this same doctor and the dentist equipment back in episode 5, and we even hear him doing that same whistle from that episode, that whistle being the tune of The Wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald, a song about the sinking of a freight ship back in 1975 in Lake Superior. Now, if you listen to the song, it could totally be applied to the depths of Lumen and the resurrection of Keir. Give it a listen. Anyway, Gemma is being put through life experiences that aren't the most pleasant and may cause pain and or anxiety, but are nonetheless necessary. They are using Gemma as a test subject, placing her in stressful situations, purposely making the flight all the more terrifying, purposely making the dentist appointment all the more painful, purposely making the letter writing painful, so that when Gemma becomes conscious again, they can quiz her on the levels of pain and anxiety that she feels following those experiences that she wasn't actually conscious for. Lumen is going beyond using Severance as a way to never actually have to experience a day of work, but also doing other life tasks that we don't want to bother with. And this is so unfortunate for the innies that do have to experience these unpleasant experiences in life. I mean, imagine your entire life being riding on airplanes or going to the dentist or watching heavy spoilers. It would be truly miserable. But as we know all too well, they have no respect for the life of an innie, and this is yet another example of Lumen essentially promoting a form of slave labor that elites can afford. Their severed selves are essentially their unpaid servants, and of course when we talk about slave labor, it is natural for the mind to go back to the Civil War where African Americans were put through this same torture on an even greater level, and this ties to Lumen and Keir's connections to the Civil War with paintings like this, and the connection to Cold Harbor being a battle that the South won in the Civil War, as well as other racist behaviors we've seen by Lumen, like these blackface paintings. And you can also draw a parallel between innies and actual slaves from American history, when characters like Helena and Miss Wong have said that innies are not people.
I am a person. You are not.
You shouldn't let them have a funeral. It makes them feel like people.
Okay, so next up we get this awesome shot of Mark, and I'm just gonna play it. I I love how we are seeing him in an elevator to mirror how he transitions from personality to personality in that severing elevator. But here we're seeing him transition from his current self to his old self before losing Gemma. And I really enjoyed getting to see Devin, Rickon, Mark, and Gemma together. I enjoyed seeing their little family. It gives some context to the mourning that we've seen in season 1. We never actually saw their family together, but you know, I'm a big, show me, don't tell me kind of guy, but I will still say, even though that we've actually seen them together now, season 1 did a great job of still having that gut punch, that mourning emotional feel without actually ever having showed us the family together, but still really glad we got to see it. So next we got this really heartbreaking scene, Gemma's miscarriage, and I mean, I knew it was coming, but it still hit me like a truck. So it was already eerie seeing Mark and Gemma at a blood bank owned by Lumen, and now it's even more eerie seeing them at a fertility clinic that is owned by Lumen. And if you look closely at that damn doctor in the fertility office, he is looking right at Gemma, and it is of course the same guy, Dr. Maller, who is experimenting on her on the testing floor. So I theorized a while ago that Gemma got involved with Lumen, likely in her attempts at becoming pregnant, and now I'm thinking that Lumen may even be responsible for her miscarriage as a way of luring her in. We got some flashbacks in the style of the reintegration process, showing the outer world and the severed floor intertwined, such as this shot of Mark getting clothes from his dresser, but he's in a Lumen hallway. And if you look closely, we can see Mark's hand in his jacket because he is hiding Rickon's book, The You Are, from Miss Casey. Remember, that book got left behind by Milchek in this conference room, and it was then found by Bert, Dylan, Mark, and Helly, and Mark was supposed to turn it in to his higher-ups, but he actually kept it in his desk drawer. We then finally get to see what's going on those damn MDR computers. We get this cool shot traveling down to the testing floor through the computer cords, where we see Mark and the other MDR members are being observed. They're being studied simply as test subjects for the severance procedure.
Are the severance barriers holding?
Yes, the technology is working.
And I thought it was creepy that this dude watching Mark is even credited as Mark Watcher. And if you look at the other screens, we can see Bert, Dylan, and Helly also being observed by their watchers. And what's interesting is all of these watchers favor the employee that they are watching. This guy slightly favors Mark, especially with the haircut. The same is true for this guy watching Irving, this guy watching Dylan, and this redheaded woman watching Helly. And then we cut to the same shot of Gemma that we saw at the very end of the first episode of this season. Okay, so I loved this bit where the doctor guy spews some cure nonsense and Gemma ain't having it at all.
Can you please just talk like a normal person?
It reminded me of this scene from earlier in the season when Mark mouthed off to Milchek.
Whatever you say, Mr. Milchek. Praise cure.
Now, back at Mark's with Devin and Ragabi, we hear Ragabi say that Miss Cobell was raised by Lumen.
She was raised by them. She's a soldier.
This likely means that, like Miss Wong, from a young age, Miss Cobell was brought into the Lumen family, perhaps even from birth, and she too may have attended the School of Winter Tide, which Miss Wong is aspiring to enroll in. We then get the name drop of the episode.
Chikai Bardo.
He said it! He said it!
And we see Gemma holding the same card that we saw Dylan take from OND back in season 1.
The ideographic card you took from OND. I saw the footage of you taking it.
Now, seeing this card in Gemma and Mark's life prior to either of them working at Lumen was so freaking just infuriating and simultaneously was, eerie. Lumen is preying on these people. It gave me this sick feeling because we know the crash course that they are on, and this amplifies now our understanding of Lumen's predatory nature. And later we even see Gemma doing the same yoga style moves that we see on that card. Now I also noticed that Gemma is using a red pen as opposed to like a blue pen, once again giving us that imagery of blue being the dominant color on the severed floor and red being the dominant color of the above world. Drummond says,
"The nosebleed set us back."
A reference to the previous episode where Mark and Helly are kissing in the hall and we see his nose begin to bleed as a result of his reintegration. So this is giving us a bit of a timeline of events here. Now, Drummond then took the words out of my mouth when he asked Dr. Maller,
"Why are you wearing that stupid sweater?"
But you'll notice that this isn't the first time we've seen the Doctor wearing his many disguises in this observatory room. We saw him wearing this costume a little earlier in the episode as well while in that same room. Now, as the Christmas scene approaches, we hear the song Baby It's Cold Outside playing. This song choice is important because of the emotions that it elicits and their connection to what's happening at Lumen and Gemma wanting to leave. Don't get me wrong, I love this song. My favorite version of it is from Elf. Baby, it's cold outside.
Get out! Don't look at me! Get out!
But the song did get canceled for an understandable reason. She's trying to leave, but homie ain't taking no for an answer. And that perfectly mirrors what's happening here with Gemma. She wants to go home, but they won't let her leave. Gemma says,
It's always Christmas.
reinforcing the clear implication that she has many severed selves, and for this one as an example, it's always Christmas. This perfectly represents how even something special like Christmas can be miserable if it's the only thing you ever experience. Everything that makes Christmas special would become old and tired if it was Christmas every waking moment of your life. The same is true for the severed employees. Even if they make the workplace somewhat pleasant, it would still feel like purgatory if you could never leave and never have other experiences. Now, the song we're hearing here is I'll Be Seeing You by Billie Holiday. This song, like this episode, is about missing a loved one and the memories of them that remain. This song was especially popular among soldiers serving during World War II, and it of course applies perfectly to what Mark and Gemma are both feeling in this episode. Now, we hear mention of this book,
The Death of Ivan Ilyich.
This is the story of a judge in 19th century Russia suffering a long and painful death, which is essentially what's happening to Gemma and, you know, maybe even Mark. He's the main character. We knew he's probably going to be fine. But throughout this episode, he's also suffering through something that could end with him dying. I do think that this line from Drummond about the doctor having to let Gemma go, I think that could actually mean that they have every intention of killing Gemma once these tests are complete. Once again, tying back to that book, a long, slow, painful death. Now, here we can see these darkened vignette corners, once again giving us the impression that they are all being watched by hidden cameras, and that constant surveillance is again depicted with these motion sensor lights following her movement through the hallways. Her running through this maze, like a hall, is also a direct parallel to Mark's hallway run in the season 2 premiere. Now, when Gemma arrives on the severed floor, now as Miss Casey, we see Milchek out of breath, still in his leather motorcycle jacket, meaning that he likely just received orders to get his ass down to that elevator pronto when she tried to escape. Nice touch, great attention to detail. That's what I love about this show. So when police approach the front door of Mark and Gemma's house, removing their hats, Mark easily pieces together that something terrible has happened, and we see him literally step backwards away from the door and away from the police. Him refusing to answer the door is symbolizing him running away from the truth. Mark did not want to hear that his wife had died. It's almost as if he thinks if he doesn't hear it, then it's not something that has actually happened yet. And that escape from truth is paralleled when he gets severed. He doesn't want to live with that pain. He is running from that hard truth. And the same is true in this season when we saw Mark running from the truth that Gemma was probably alive. He knew it deep down. He knew full well that his innie was referring to Gemma when he yelled, "She's alive," but he just couldn't bring himself to accept it. All right, guys, well, those are just my thoughts, but there is so much more to analyze about this episode, and that's why I want to bring in the ScreenCrush video analysis team. We have Harriet L., Lee M., and Pete F. joining me to discuss episode 7. Guys, this episode was so different and I loved it. That's what I really liked about episode 4. We got to go outside of the office and it was just a different episode. I think this episode surpassed episode 4. Maybe one of my favorite episodes of Severance, but I want to get your thoughts on it. Also, just your thoughts on this season as a whole, like just brief, like, are you enjoying it? I think I know the answer to all of that. Harriet, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, this episode was just beautifully shot, and I think, like you said, like episode 4, it was really just a change from the status quo, which I'm really enjoying that this season seems really willing to do. I feel like when a show like sort of comes into unexpected popularity, there's a chance that they might try to play it safe with the second season and really stick to what worked. But they seem really unafraid to just swing for the fences. And so far, for me at least, they're not missing.
Pete, what about you? Are you enjoying this season? And are you with me that this episode, it might be my favorite so far?
I think it might be my, it's funny, when I first watched it, I was like, I don't know what it's like, Star Wars in the background. It's like The Last Jedi for me. When I walked out of it, I was like, what was that? The second time I watched it, I was like, that was amazing. It was, I would say it was almost like an art school horror film, the way it was shot, the way it was put together. There was so much tension. And the thing that I just love about this show is every week we realize how good the actors are, because Gemma we got such a broad range. We got robot Gemma all the way to the most emotionally drained version, and it was so good. It was such a great episode from that perspective as well.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is like the first time we're actually getting to spend time with Gemma. Like, we've been with Miss Casey some, but it's kind of wild how this is a character that we haven't really spent a lot of time with, but I didn't mind at all. It didn't feel like a bottle episode or anything. It felt really important to the overall story. Lee, what did you think of this episode?
I mean, just to back you both, I thought it was absolutely incredible, and especially for something with a big montage scene, I'm always a little ambivalent when there's huge montage scenes in films, because they could either be super cheesy or go on for so long, but like Pete said, this was almost like an art school type, like it felt real. Like, I felt like I was just watching this, like, a wedding video from these two people rather than, oh, they're pretending they're in love. Like, this made me feel, as you were saying, like, we haven't really seen Gemma, but I felt like I knew Mark and Gemma as a couple after watching that scene, where I think that some other, like, shows that have done scenes like that, or films that have done scenes like that, they seem a little bit like, okay, I know what you're doing here, like, you play it to nice music, but when it came to the scene when Gemma had her miscarriage, like, going off of that montage was heartbreaking. I definitely think this was the champion of the season for me.
And I would add to that, too, is you also, a montage gets you from point A to point B. This, like, was from point A to point M, because it was so much, you saw so much. What I took away from it was, I fell in love with Gemma. I understand why Mark loves her and is going so hard to find her, but I also saw Mark become sort of that asshole version of Mark that we see as his outie, and it was because he started as such a cuddly, fun boyfriend guy, and by the time it got to that scene where all of our hearts sank when she was leaving and he was staying in the office and we knew exactly what was about to happen, it just was like, oh, Mark, you screwed this one up, buddy.
The whole episode, I knew it was coming. Like, you could just tell, okay, that's where this is headed, and it's still, like I said in the breakdown, it hit me like a truck. It just broke my heart. And you make a good point about Mark. It's almost as if, like, this flashback Mark, when he's like flirting with Gemma for the first time and all that, it feels more like any Mark. And it's like, and then that pain from the miscarriage and then losing Gemma, we see him become more asshole Mark. And so it's cool to now look back at like Severance season 1, and we understand why any Mark is the way he is. It's because he hasn't gone through that trauma yet. So it all connects really nicely. And, I like in a show, show me instead of tell me. I think season 1 actually did a really good job at just telling us. It didn't feel like, too much exposition, but it was really nice, like, actually getting to see, like, their relationship, seeing the family together. Harriet, I have a really bad feeling about what they have planned for Gemma. I think it is clear. One of our social editors, Ethan Ing, brought up to me that Dr. Maller, he seems like he is obsessed with Gemma. I got the impression that when Drummond said, you realize when she's done, you have to let her go. I'm getting the impression that Drummond views Gemma as like a lab rat, that once she's done with these experiments, she has to be put down, and that Maller is like obsessed with her, like in love with her. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think Maller has like this plan, like he lied to her about like Mark having a daughter and moving on and all that? Do you think that he is planning to like keep her around? And did you get the same vibe that like Drummond and Lumen, their intention is for her to be put down?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely do not get the sense that the plan is once Cold Harbor is completed for Gemma to go back to Mark. They have no intention of letting her go. That line when she asks if she can go back to Mark and Mallory says something along the lines of, like, he'll be happier in the new world you are helping to, like, create.
Mark will benefit from the world you're siring.
Yeah, that's a classic Lumen non-answer. So, and I don't know if I think that Mallory is actually intending on keeping her around. I definitely agree that he's obsessed with her, kind of mirroring the way that Helena is obsessed with Mark, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know what Mallory's plans are, because I could see him, like, he definitely has some affection for her, but it might be more in terms of, like, the affection one feels for, like, a, you know, it could be more of like a pet relationship for him, where he doesn't necessarily see her. I mean, I think it's clear he doesn't really see her as a person, so.
Yeah, because, I mean, he hasn't stopped abusing her, like, through all of these different torturous tactics. And I nearly jumped out of my chair watching this episode through the second time when I saw Mallory in the fertility office look right at Gemma. I was like, what the? Okay. Lee, do you think in the hallway, when Gemma encounters Milchek, we hear her say, "Where's," and then he cuts her off. I'm thinking, "Where's Mark?" Right? Are you on the same page as me there?
I'm thinking, "Where's Mark?" God, I'll be honest, that hallway scene, I think, was worse than the miscarriage scene for me, because it just cemented that, like, this really is it for her. Like, she makes this grand escape, goes to see Milchek, is immediately sent back down. I don't think that she would ever be able to, like, leave that and see Mark, but yeah, I mean, her one true purpose, I feel like, is just getting out of there to see him.
It really cements the fact that she is in, like, this purgatory, because they have turned her severed self on the severed floor, which is above, is like this very, like, timid, confrontational person. And so she literally cannot get out of the testing floor because her consciousness can't exist beyond that barrier. Okay. Speaking of Miss Casey, we got to see Miss Casey for a little bit, and it kind of reminded me, like, this whole time I'm thinking, I just want Gemma to get to the surface and escape. But then I remember, oh, we have Miss Casey. I would like to see her, like, get reintegrated or something so she can also exist. And speaking of Miss Casey, during this, like, flash scene in the hallway, we see Mark playing with, like, this clay tree. Pete, you actually pointed that out to me. I missed it during my watch through. That is actually a scene from season 1 when Mark is having his last wellness session with Miss Casey. Now, I talked about earlier this season how that tree that he's creating out of clay, it's like the tree that was in her office in the wellness center, but was then taken out. But Pete, you actually had a theory that this clay didn't look like a tree. It looked like something else. I want to let you share that theory real quick.
Yeah, my first thought was that it was a child's hand. And that when I just saw it flash by those multiple times, I literally went back and stopped. But yeah, I mean, and I think that's all related to what's really kind of at the center of the Mark and Gemma relationship, and that kept flashing through. So yeah, I think that's building a baby, if you will.
Yeah, and see, well, and of course we have the baby Kier and the intro and all that. And see, Pete, when you said that immediately took me back to episode 4. There is a scene in episode 4 in the woods where we see ice coming off of this tree branch, and that to me looked like an infant's hand. So there's something going on. I don't know what. Do you guys have any theories? All of my breakdowns are me just, like, saying these wild theories. So I want to give any of you the opportunity to join me in just, like, some wild speculation.
Well, the thing that struck me this time for the first time, and it was probably because this is the first time we've seen what they're doing to Gemma, and we're seeing her as her Audi is stuck inside of the severed building, below the severed floor, and they're basically putting her through these different tortures in every single room. And it struck me that her name is Miss Casey, and to me that means case study. And so maybe what they're trying to do is they're trying to have her, they're testing every single possibility to see what happens when your innie comes out. What do they remember? Because remember, they asked her, how many rooms were you in? Her outie remembered that it was 6, but she didn't remember what was happening in those rooms. She just knew by name. So some sort of way to ensure that the severed employee and the outie employee don't remember anything.
I mean, that's even when she was Miss Casey, and Miss Cobell was making sure when she was doing that wellness check-in with Mark that neither of them were recognizing one another. So it's not even the physical tasks of going to a dentist or doing all these like laborious things. It's the emotional labor of like, this is someone you have a huge connection to. If you see them not only like once, twice, if you just see them in passing, like, will that spark something? I definitely think it's testing to see how far they can go with severing a person, like how much that they can actually retain based on what they go through.
Yeah, the airplane scene, which was just so out of nowhere and so weird, yeah. But that solidified that these are little torture rooms, and these are little ways to see how far they can push them.
Bringing it back to like the wellness sessions from season 1 and the tree that like Mark is shaping out of clay, like the fact that that's also like in that episode contrasted with him visiting the tree that like Gemma crashed into. So like, is that also connected? Like there's clearly something is coming through, but how much? And I really like the idea of that tree as like a baby hand, so it's like life and death and all of that. And I mean, also I just want to mention for a second the like the watchers of the like 4 of them, like, and how they look similar to the macrodata team, like, and I honestly don't know if that's just like, you know, the Severance crew having like a fun time and doing something that's a bit creepy by having them all look a bit similar to the macrodat team, especially with like Dylan's interview earlier in the season, which also had that same idea of like doubles. But I also like, I had like a little bit of a wild, like, is this like some kind of attempt of like failed recreations of the macrodat team that they're not quite right? Like, I don't know. I don't really think it's cloning because the Severance crew said it's not, but
wait a second, we're the macrodat team. We got the older guy, we got the woman, we got the 2. Yeah, it's all coming together. Look at us.
I'll be Dylan. I want to be Dylan. So, Harriet, I think you make a great point. There is something going on here with like I call them 3D printed clones that we saw in episode 4. I don't know what they are. You are right that the Severance crew did say it's not cloning, which it very well may not be. But then again, I don't believe anything any actor says anymore after Andrew Garfield and No Way Home and all that. But there's definitely something. There's the Kieran Dieter. There's all of the twin imagery that I've mentioned, like with themes that they're taking from Genesis, like with Cain and Abel. There's the 3D thing, the macrodat team being like you said, the watchers look just like them. I think my theory is that it is somehow tied to consciousness, because that's what Severance is all about, is consciousness and awareness and all that. So what I love about this show is that I don't know. I hope that all of my theories are wrong, and that when the truth is finally revealed, it is just like the most bizarre possible thing that we could have never seen coming. And I think that is what would make the show just truly like achieve this level of mystery. Like if you take a show like, say, I'll pick on True Detective Night Country. I liked that show, but I was not happy with like the twist, and I thought it did too much with the supernatural, the science fiction. I think Severance is just walking this line perfectly.
And I think another great thing about the show, and I was just thinking about this the other day, is because it isn't based on an existing novel or something else, the speculation that we all have, and that's one of the great things about Severance, is there's so much speculation, and every week you get enough to just be hungry enough for the next week. There's nobody out there saying, well, in the book, what happens is Miss Cobell does blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We're all in the dark. None of us know what's coming, and that just makes this so much fun.
This, when it leans into the horror, it works really well. Like the one scene with Irv and the creature in the forest behind the desk, like when it gives you it's going into horror, you know where it's going. And I think that works so much with this genre of this Lovecraftian-esque office space of just these fears lurking behind every cubicle.
Anyway, okay, it is time to clock out. I want to thank you guys for joining me, and I look forward to you joining me for the rest of the season. I hope you guys will return. We've had Harriet L, Lee M, and Pete F. Guys, Severance, this is episode 7, right? And we have 8, 9, and 10 left. We have 3 episodes left. I am anxious to hear all of your thoughts and theories down in the comments below. You can add us on our various social media platforms, or you can find us on our Discord, link in the description below. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.